Thank you. My name is Prof Fr Éamonn Conway. I'm Executive Dean for the Faculty of Education, Philosophy and Theology, and I'll be your MC for this evening. For Professor Éamonn Conway's lecture, All Things Are Connected for the Glory of God. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of the land upon which our university sits. The university acknowledges that the Fremantle campus where we gather tonight is located on Whadjuk country, and we pay our respects to elders past and present. Before we begin with the lecture, a couple of housekeeping matters. I wonder if you could please make sure that your phone is turned to silent. If you need to use the bathrooms, they're located just outside the foyer there. And if there is an emergency, please follow the directions of the event staff. Thank you. I'd like to hand over now to the National Director of Chaplaincy, Faith and Formation, Tom Gourlay, who's going to lead us in the university prayer. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, everyone. I'd like to just invite you to join me in prayer in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Notre, Mother of Jesus and our Mother, we ask you to guide our university. Mary, as you cared for Jesus, show a loving care for us as we expand our minds in study and research, as we open our hearts to future possibilities and extend our hands to those who are in need. Mary, seat of wisdom, teach us to care for the land and the cross of this country of the Southern, land and the people of this country of the Southern Cross. In this academic community dedicated to you, help us to find new yet faithful ways of bringing the message of Jesus to Australia and to those who share this region of the earth with us. Our Lady, seat of wisdom, pray for us in the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Thank you, Tom. It's now my pleasure to introduce tonight's guest speaker, Reverend Professor Éamonn Conway. We're delighted to welcome Father Conway to our city and to our university. We're proud to be a part of Fremantle, a place where we are a connected, active and integral member of the local community. And it's public events like this tonight that allow us to open our doors and bring friends from across the university community together to engage, connect and share knowledge and ideas. Tonight we will have the pleasure of hearing Father Conway, who has just joined the university as the inaugural Professor of Integral Human Development within the School of Philosophy and Theology. This is a very important appointment as we take steps to deliver our new strategic plan, especially across the pillars of universality and integral human development. Professor Conway has enjoyed a remarkable and varied career that has taken him around the world. His achievements are many, and I'm not going to read his CV, but I would like to acknowledge key achievements such as serving on a number of Irish government advisory bodies, including the Information Society Commission, the Futures Island Advisory Panel of the National Irish Economic and Social Development Office. From 2009 to 2011, Father Conway was President of the European Society for Catholic Theology, the first Irish theologian to hold this position. And in 2012, Pope Benedict appointed Father Conway as an expert advisor to the 13th World Synod of Bishops on the new evangelisation. Based on his experience and roles, I'm confident that we'll be treated to a deeply insightful and illuminating presentation. Please join me in welcoming
Thank you, everybody. Just give me a moment. I think I have two microphones I'm told to switch on at this time. Seems to be one of them. We'll be talking about technology in the future.
Now I hope we're good to go. That sounds good, doesn't it? Excellent, excellent. Chancellor, Vice-Chancellor, Trustees, Governors, Directors, Dean, distinguished guests, colleagues and students of the University. It is a great honour to have been invited to give this lecture inaugurating the chair of Integral Human Development at the University of Notre Dame. And even so, more so, to be the first person appointed to this position. The establishment of this position, as indeed Caroline has said, is the outcome of the University Strategic Plan launched earlier this year, which identifies integral human development as one of its key 5 pillars. It is also an important indication in regard to the unique contribution that this university seeks to make to the higher education landscape in this country. In what follows, though self-evidently still very new to this country and indeed to this university, I hope you don't mind me by beginning to summarise the university's understanding of and commitment it has made to integral human development as detailed in the strategic plan. I then wish to show you how this is founded very firmly upon recent church teaching as well as the wider ecclesial tradition. And then in the second part, I want to explain why I see the university's focus on integral human development to be both timely and necessary in terms of our culture and our society. And then in the third and final part of the paper, I'd like to make a few closing observations and offer some considerations perhaps as we seek to take this pillar of the strategic plan forward here in the university. So I begin integral human development here at Notre Dame. Since joining Notre Dame just a couple of weeks ago, I've been asked what my job title is on several occasions. And on each case that I've mentioned integral human development, I've been asked, could you please repeat that? As a job title, it is a bit of a mouthful. But one would look hard and long to find a better description of what integral human development means than is actually found in the university's strategic plan. And I want to acknowledge that some of the authors of this particular section of the strategic plan are actually here in the room. So if I don't get this right, you can talk to them afterwards. In the plan we read, and I quote, "The growth of the whole human person encompassing all aspects of life, social, economic, political, cultural, environmental, and spiritual." And the strategic plan goes on to say that integral human development recognizes the dignity of the human person as created by God in God's image with reason and freedom. 2 core words, of course, in the context of a university: reason, and then, of course, academic and all other kinds of human freedom. Acknowledging that the university's first task is to foster the intellectual developments of its staff and students, in accordance with St. John Paul II's Charter for Higher Education, Ex Corde Ecclesiae, which he published in 1990, the strategic plan underscores the striving for academic excellence, which can never be an end in itself, but must always be in the service of protecting and advancing human dignity and cultural heritage. And this can only happen if, as the strategic plan goes on to state, the university commits itself not only to informing its students, but also to forming them. And so this university has committed itself to the formation of character, which, the plan states, and I'm quoting again, opens the possibility of making good choices and using our freedom to live fully human lives, and so to contribute to the common good. None of this is possible unless the university as a community is hospitable to faith and to grace, which are the bedrock of authentic human flourishing. And again, that's mentioned very clearly and overtly in the strategic plan. And so the intellectual development of students and staff must be accompanied, therefore, by their spiritual formation and development as well. So what is meant by spiritual development? I think somewhat unhelpfully as a concept, spiritual development tends to lend itself to self-definition. It can mean different things to different people, along the lines of Humpty Dumpty's answer to Alice. When I use a word, it means just what I want to choose it to mean, nothing more or less. Increasingly, one finds that spiritual development does not necessarily have to refer or even to affirm a relationship with the divine. When some people use the term, they seem to mean nothing more than an aspect of themselves, they're defining spirituality within what we call the immanent frame. This means that people coming from a non-Christian or even perhaps a secular perspective will not necessarily find reference to spiritual development as a strategic goal in an institute of higher education disconcerting. But could I suggest to you that when Christians use the concept or refer to the concept of spiritual development, it isn't helpful for us to consider it in such imprecise terms. Nor can we mean it to refer simply to one aspect of human development among others, such that if included or omitted, the other aspects of human development would remain unaltered. Why is this the case? Well, the answer lies in our understanding of the nature of God. The nature of the human-divine relationship, and perhaps more fundamentally, how we Christians believe God is experienced and responded to in the course of our daily lives. We Christians believe that God does not present God's self to humans merely as an optional add-on to our lives. The God of Jesus Christ is not as though one object out there to whom we can relate apart from the world and our day-to-day lives, available to us when we choose to tune in, a kind of a pay-as-you-go God, but otherwise not necessarily supportive or intrusive. And for us again, as coming from a Christian faith perspective, moments of prayer and worship during which we turn our attention explicitly to God can never be seen as the only moments of our lives during which we attend to our spiritual development or we put our spirituality to action. God is our creator, and we are interdependent creatures whose lives in all their facets, in all their aspects, are held and sustained in existence by God. God is co-present and co-responded to in our social relations, in how economically just and responsibly we act, in how we shape our culture, in our respect for human life, respect for our common home. In other words, God is co-present and co-responded to in all aspects of human existence and therefore in all aspects of human development. God just doesn't have a relationship with us that sits alongside all our other relationships. As Richard Gaiardi puts it, God is the loving, life-giving relationality that underpins all our relationships. So I think when we realize that what lies at the heart of reality is loving relationality, then we also recognize that the concept of integral human development is unavoidable for Christians. And this in two ways. The first is what we've been talking about. God is present and manifest in each and every dimension of our being: social, economic, political, cultural, environmental, and spiritual. Given that we human beings are made in God's image, and that God is life-giving relationality, it follows that we as human beings are all intimately and integrally bound up with one another. There are no solo runs when it comes to salvation. We're called to live, and if necessary, to die for one another. Paradoxically, I think this is an interesting countercultural point in regard to our take on self-fulfillment as Christians. Self-fulfillment, of which there's so much emphasis in our society nowadays, from a Christian point of view, can actually only be achieved through self-sacrifice. So now we come to just take a few moments to reflect on integral human development in church teaching, just to demonstrate, so to say, how well-founded what we're achieving or attempting to achieve here in this university is grounded in recent magisterial teaching. The concept of integral human development owes its origins really to the years immediately after the Second Vatican Council. By the way, could I just say, in case you're trying to remember all of this or whatever, or maybe tuning out, there's a copy of the paper, as we say on one of our TV programs in Ireland, for everyone in the audience. So there's a full text available afterwards. Is that okay? So just, yeah. So the concept of integral human development owes its origins immediately following the Second Vatican Council, and in particular to the publication of St. Paul VI's Populo Progressio, which is considered to be one of the key documents in Catholic social teaching. And here he wrote, what follows I'm going to be quoting a few of these documents, but he wrote that human development cannot be restricted to economic growth alone. To be authentic, it must be well-rounded. It must foster the development of each human person and of the whole human person. I quote here, we cannot allow economics to be separation from human realities, nor development from the civilization in which it takes place. What counts for us is the human person, each individual human person, each human group, and humanity as a whole. Here Paul VI is referring back, in fact, to the Council's Constitution on the Church of the Modern World, Gaudium et Spes, which underlined that we human beings are the source, the centre, and the purpose of all economic and social life. So economic and social life are there at the service of humankind, I think we would now also say, of all of creation. In other words, economic and social development has no value except in respect to how it is at the service of human development. Each of the recent popes has made a contribution to embedding the concept of integral human development in the life of the Church. St. John Paul II, for example, called for a new evangelization that was to be devoted to the promotion of the whole human being. And he also emphasized that human freedom in areas of economic and social activity will never be authentic if cut off from what he called the truth about the human person. Now, not surprisingly, that was a good inroad for Pope Benedict XVI, who devoted an entire encyclical, Caritas in Veritate, and I didn't realize this until I was looking, that the full title of it actually is Integral Human Development in Charity and Truth. To demonstrate how the truth about the human person can only be fully realized if the truth about God is also acknowledged and accepted, and is in fact its foundation. So the truth about the human person is intimately tied up with the truth about God, how we understand God, how we relate to God. And Pope Benedict, a humanism, he says, which excludes God, runs the risk of being, quote, an inhuman humanism, a truncated conceptualization of what it is to be a human person, which in turn risks being self-serving, ensnared in the fashions of the day, rather than being a genuine mission of selfless solidarity towards the whole of humankind. So if we bracket God, we ourselves become incapable of developing an authentic human person, humanism. With God, however, again, Pope Benedict says, we can muster new energy in the service of a truly integral humanism. So it comes to Pope Francis, of course, who has taken this concept so seriously that he has put integral human development at the heart of the mission of the Holy See by establishing, for the first time, a dicastery, a department, with that as its title and as its job. And he says that every human being has the right to live with dignity and to develop integrally. And I suppose with the sense of purpose and passion that perhaps only a Pope who comes from the global south can bring to bear, Pope Francis has driven home at every possible opportunity how economic policy, divorced from concerns about integral human development, can only result in whole swathes of humanity being treated as though they are simply consumer goods to be used and discarded. So-called economic progress has seen the growth of wealth for the select few go hand in hand with the growth of inequality that has to be suffered and endured by the many. And I think in a statement that very much underpins our university's emphasis on the formation of character, Pope Francis speaks of the need to help individuals and societies, quote, to mature in the moral values that foster integral human development. And he specifically mentions a striving for excellence and what is best for others, their growth in maturity and health, the cultivation of values, and not simply material well-being. So as you can see, each of the popes has brought his own particular experience and I suppose charism to bear upon the concept of integral human development. And so, if I can now, I'd like to just turn to a few voices, just like I mentioned 4, from the tradition that I think help us just to deepen this and appreciate it a bit more richly for ourselves. In terms of illustrating how integral human development is firmly rooted in the Church's tradition, maybe I'd like to first of all begin with St. Irenaeus of Lyon, who gives the title, of course, to this lecture. We're familiar with his dictum, I suppose, that the glory of God is a human person fully alive. Actually, if it's more accurately translated, he says the glory of God is a living human being. But less familiar to us is the second half, really, of that sentence, which says that the life of the human being is the vision of God. So the glory of God is the human person, the living human person, and the life of the human being. What brings us to life is beholding God, it's the vision of God. In other words, we humans are only fully alive when our gaze is fixed upon God, and when we permit God's gaze towards us, God's regard for us, to be the ground upon which we daily stand. Taking this well-known dictum, taking this step one step further, in a certain sense, we have also a well-known phrase from St. Augustine. And we know, so familiar with his conviction that human hearts will not find rest until they rest in God. But again, when we cite that more fully, he's actually stating that humans will not find rest until they praise God. And he says, just to take the full text, can any praise be worthy of the Lord's majesty? How magnificent his strength, how inscrutable his wisdom. We are one of your creatures, Lord, and our instinct, I think this is very important, our instinct is to praise you. Since we are part of your creation, we wish to praise you. The thought of you stirs us so deeply that we cannot be content unless we praise you, because you made us for yourself, and our hearts find no rest or peace until they rest in you. So I think this is beautiful, this concept of that we're called not just to live, but to praise God. We're at our best as human persons when we're praising God. And on similar lines, actually, St. Ignatius of Loyola, couldn't leave the Jesuits out of this, they tell us that human beings are created to praise, reverence, and serve God their Lord, and by means of this to save their souls, and that the other things on the face of the earth are created for human beings to help them in their work toward the end for which they have been created. So, from Saints Augustine, Ignatius, Irenaeus, I think we get 2 important insights into what it means to be an integral human being. The first is that it requires us to be fully alive. In contrast, perhaps, to the virtual compulsion nowadays, as one Irish poet, Brendan Kennelly, he says, we're compelled nowadays to half do a lot of things, to half live our lives, to half dream our dreams, to half love our loves. We've turned ourselves into half people. The second thing we can glean, I think, from these saints is that we are most truly ourselves, most fully integrated when we are praising God. Praising God here suggests, of course, explicit acknowledgement of God as our Creator when we worship, when we pray, when we celebrate liturgy. But I suggest it may also include the more silent praise that is implicit in the simple, though not always easy, acceptance of our lives as gift, in all their beauty and at times their brokenness. The spiritual writer David Steiner-Ras says, I'm quoting, the more we become alive and awake, the more everything we do becomes prayer. And if this is the case, then even a struggling acceptance of our lives as gift, rather than our rejection of them as burden, but out of arrogance or despair, is in itself an act of gratitude, and therefore one of praise. The fourth and final voice I'd like to call to the witness stand in terms of integral human development, and of course this lecture will not be complete without a reference to St. John Henry Newman. His thoughts on integral human development, he doesn't use the term, are particularly helpful in that he develops them in the context, of course, of the mission of a Catholic university. And I want to reference maybe a text that isn't most often cited. It's an address he gave to students on the opening of the Catholic University in Dublin in 1854. In this he acknowledges that students have come to the university so that they can become qualified in a variety of professions: law, medicine, civil engineering, priesthood, and so on, very like Notre Dame. He also acknowledges as self-evident that whatever they learn will, inverted commas, have a bearing upon these professions. Obviously, we would hope so. But then he tells them, you might learn your profession in other places besides this, but there is something you will learn here better than anywhere else. And Newman goes on to tell them that what in view distinguishes the education that a Catholic university has to offer them from other higher institutions, higher education institutions. And these are his words. He says, there is an education necessary and desirable, and above all, that which may be called professional. Professions differ, and what is an education for one youth is not the education for another. But there is one kind of education which all should have in common, and which is distinct from the education which is given to fish each for their profession. It is the education which makes the human person. It does not make physicians, surgeons, engineers, soldiers, bankers, merchants, but it makes persons. And this is the education to which you especially come to this university. It is to be made persons. So there's a question maybe we could take forward for ourselves. What can you learn here at Notre Dame better than anywhere else? Educating human persons, Newman explains, means enabling students to become, his phrase, well-principled and of cultured mind. University graduates thus equipped for life will be valued for what they are, without, as he says, a thought on the part of those who know them, what their pursuit or trade or profession is, so long as it is an honest one. So I think there's an interesting emphasis there that there's something we need to attend to that is more than the parts, the sum of the parts, what we offer in the individual professional courses and so on that we provide. And I think these sentiments actually are picked up very well, perhaps unwittingly, but maybe they both have the same source, by Pope St. John Paul II in his encyclical Labor Exercens, where he says that the basis for determining the value of human work is not primarily the kind of work being done, but the fact that the one doing it is a person. It's not the work being done, the fact that the person doing it is a person, is a human person. I think that's very important for us to remember too, even in the context of a community here of the university. Every single person here contributes to what the university is. And the dignity is not the work being done, but it's being done by a human person. This means that the focus of our efforts, especially at a Catholic university, should be forming students with the aptitude and the ability to engage in whatever work or way of life they find themselves in, with dignity and with personal integrity. There's a footnote to the volume for which I've taken Newman's essay, and it's actually referring to Alistair MacIntyre, who has said that liberal knowledge transforms us as human beings. It makes us into what we ought to be and need to be if we are good human beings. At the heart of this transformation, it is noted by MacIntyre, is the ability to make sound judgments, which fits human beings better to take on whatever role or responsibility come their way. And I note that our university's billboards reflect what has been referred to here by Newman and MacIntyre very well, I think, by stating very simply that what we offer is an ethical education. And this emphasis, I think, that we're hearing here from Newman and MacIntyre fits very well with the contemporary emphasis on developing students as lifelong learners in an age where, you could say, the only thing certain is uncertainty. However, integral human development is about more than developing skills. It has fundamentally to do with enabling our students to appreciate and accept their inherent dignity and the unique service for which they are uniquely gifted and called. Just before moving on to the second part of my presentation, so what I've done so far is obviously just unfolded what the university has said before itself in its strategic plan, and then rooted that in the tradition, both in terms of magisterial documents and our sayings, if you like, from Irenaeus to Newman. The university is very much here in step with developments in other parts of the world at Catholic universities that are placing an emphasis on integral human development. So, for example, Notre Dame, I'm getting this, I'm beginning to get this right, Notre Dame, Indiana, has made this concept a key focus of its Keough School of Global Affairs. And similarly, the Catholic University of Lisbon, with whom we're hopefully entering into partnership, is running seminars on integral human development as part of an international PhD program and research network on contemporary humanism. Our strategic plan specifically mentions that research will serve the integral human development that is fundamental to all our work as a university. So I think these timely developments across a number of Catholic universities provide great opportunities for our international cooperation and research, not just, of course, in research, but also learning and teaching, and we give an international context to our efforts to embed integral human development here at Notre Dame. So I want to move on now, if it's okay, to the second part of my address, and here I want to focus on why I consider integral human development to be both timely and necessary in what I'm going to call bluntly our troubled society. Would it be an exaggeration to say that there is a crisis in many of the professions for which we are preparing students? Even a superficial search on the internet suggests that several of the professions for which we prepare students are in trouble. Take nursing, for example. In recent days, nurses in this country, I understand, have been walking off the job to protest unworkable nurse-to-patient ratios. And in recent years, again, you have to forgive me, I'm new to the country, I did a bit of research, but you please engage with me on this. 90% of national nurse associations have been saying that they're concerned about heavy workloads, insufficient resources, burnout, stress. Obviously, a lot of this is related to the pandemic, but not all of it. And indeed, it's not all going away post-pandemic. And this is all causing more nurses to leave the profession, or at least to want to leave the profession. And that's what the research says, they're leaving, or at least they want to leave. They may be staying and not leaving, which could be worse. And the evidence is that these work-related problems are not being resolved. Similarly, again, one doesn't have to go too far into the internet to find articles entitled "Teachers are leaving in droves, but no one is listening." And one of my colleagues in the School of Education, I was speaking with last week here, suggested that the numbers abandoning the teaching profession in the first 5 years after qualification could be as high as 30%. It seems that in general, teachers feel, same with language as the nurses, overworked, underpaid, underappreciated. And as one report puts it, these are just symptoms of more significant problems. And given the pivotal role that teachers play in our society, and I'm not saying nurses don't, of course, but they are identified in this piece I was reading, I think it's a good phrase, as frontline cultural workers. They play a huge role in terms of integrating society. Earlier this month, the Catholic Weekly suggested that Australian culture will fall apart unless this crisis is addressed. Well, now surely things are much better in the legal profession. Apparently not. Quote, long work hours, I know you're going to know sympathy for the legal profession. Long work hours, demanding workloads, allegations of bullying and harassment are driving up-and-coming law graduates from the industry. Add the hours to the pressure and you've got a recipe for stress. Over time, without appropriate coping mechanisms, the stress can become unbearable, leading lawyers to leave the profession. Again, I'm quoting from some of the research. You may well argue that these reports and similar reports regarding other professions are unrepresentative, that many professionals are living happy and fulfilled lives. Yet I suggest to you that there is enough discontent expressed here, at least to give us pause for thought. Pause for thought in regard to how best we can prepare our graduates for the realities of workplaces that are clearly stressful and in flux. I've no doubt that a business case could be made for integral human development to be to the fore in formation programs for the professions we refer to. This would be argued on the basis that rounded graduates, ethically trained, well-principled, of cultivated mind, as Newman says, and the ability to make sound judgments, as McIntyre says, are more likely to be able to negotiate work-life balance. They're also more likely to exercise the kind of thought leadership necessary to transform their workplaces in the service of the common good, rather than find themselves with no option but to abandon them in order to safeguard their own mental health and well-being after an expensive education, which no doubt must be at a huge cost to the public purse. However, for reasons I hope are fairly obvious, I don't want to make an argument for integral human development on the basis of value for money. I think all we have to do is look at our world, open a newspaper, look at the fact that we are probably, as Pope Francis has said, in World War III. Look at the increasing divisions in our culture and in our society. Look at the rising individualism to know that there is a case for integral human development that goes much deeper than an economic argument. So I want to delve a little bit further into the crisis and talk a little bit about what we're learning, I suppose, from some of the, I think, of the best minds reflecting on Western culture at this time. One of the most thoughtful works in recent decades, sorry, I'm just going to take a class, you probably need a moment to take a break as well. One of the best minds I've come across, and sadly he died during COVID, not of COVID, is the late Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. He may be familiar to many of you. He wrote a wonderful book, which was published in 2020, just I think shortly actually before he died, called Morality, Restoring the Common Good in Divided Times. I think every word of that title is significant. Restoring the Common Good in Divided Times. Sacks begins by citing an apparently well-known Jewish saying, "Start worrying, details to follow." The first chapter, in which he maps what he calls cultural climate change, is actually quite disturbing. He details in black and white what we already intuit, whether from our own professional experience as pastors, as many of us are here, as educators or as parents, in our own families, our own family members, or perhaps, if sufficiently self-effacing, maybe from our own personal struggles to live life authentically today. Sacks refers, for instance, to iGen, that is, to those, the generation born in 1995 or after, who are, and this is his quote, both the physically safest generation and the most mentally fragile. But it's not all about the younger generations. He also refers to research in the UK that has found that the number of over 50s receiving hospital treatment for substance abuse has quadrupled in a single decade. He doesn't refer to any research in Ireland, but if I can just throw some in there with which I'm familiar, according to research conducted before COVID, some 1.2 million prescriptions for anti-anxiety medication was issued in 1 year alone. Now bear in mind that it's a country with a population, at that time at least, of just under 4.8 million. 1 in 4. And according to the researcher, Dr. Arsland, an unacceptably large number of people are, quote, hiding behind a wall of dependency rather than facing life's problems. And meanwhile, according to the Irish Education Authority, Higher Education Authority, some 13%, and I think that's an underestimate by the way, of all humanities students suffer from mental health problems. These are, as I say, pre-COVID statistics, and at that time it was also reported by school principals that, quote, significant numbers of primary children as young as 4 are presenting with serious mental health difficulties such as anxiety, depression, and self-harm. So the Irish state, and I don't know if it's the same here in Australia, is now looking to the schools and to teachers in the classroom to address this rising tide of mental health challenges. No doubt adding to the mental health challenges faced by the teachers themselves. And you're probably, as I say, well versed with what's happening here. So if anything, I would say the COVID pandemic, the coronavirus, has only intensified a loneliness pandemic. Every bit is pervasive, disrupting even further what Sacks calls the close bonds of belonging that heal, that are needed to heal our psychological wounds. The first part of his book is called The Solitary Self, and it echoes Charles Taylor's description of what he calls the buffer self. By this, Taylor means living our lives in such a manner that we are isolated not only from one another, but actually also from deeper dimensions of ourselves. Technology, despite its obvious advantages, nonetheless contributes to the development of the buffer itself. And Sachs cites an International Monetary Fund economist who argues that human webs of connection, the relations, values, and norms that bind us to one another are being torn apart by technological innovation. And similarly, Max Frisch has said that technology, I love this, has the knack of enabling us so to arrange our world that we don't have to experience it. I think it's Rainer Rilke talks about, that are we addicted to living life at the surface. But I don't think it's technologies as such that are being got at here. We know, for instance, how they have helped communication during lockdown. I think it's more what Pope Francis calls the technocratic paradigm, a mindset which distorts how we relate to nature and to our deeper selves, and taken to extreme can even actually cause us, as technology does, to see everything in terms of means and ends, and then ultimately what's in this for me. So technology can, dispose us to an exploitative way of relating to one another and to our world. Rabbi Sachs doesn't just point out the crisis, he does suggest a way forward. He says we need to rediscover a common morality rooted in religious belief. And he quotes a historian, Will Durant, who says, "There is no significant example in the whole of history before our time of a society successfully maintaining moral life without the aid of religion. Without religion, you might just succeed in developing and sustaining kind of a moral code based on some code of justice, but not one based on love and mercy. Without a moral code founded on God's love, you will never come to genuine empathy, to, using Sachs's words, love the stranger because you know what it feels to be a stranger." So I'm convinced that if we as a university are able to make integral human development the bedrock of the experience we offer students and staff, both within and outside the classroom, we'll be making an invaluable and badly needed contribution to our troubled society. In this regard, I wanted now just to move to the final part of my presentation by making 3 observations in regard to embedding integral human development within the life of the university. Anything I say here now in this lecture should be considered as merely the beginning of an important conversation. The way to embed integral human development at Notre Dame, I think we need to discern that together in teaching and learning with and from one another, and of course our students, by adopting with the university the synodal style of journeying together as a community that Pope Francis is urging upon the Church as a whole. So the first point I want to make is that we shouldn't take the safeguarding of the distinctive Catholic nature of this university simply for granted. Perhaps the first step is to re-express our own confidence in the idea of a Catholic university which seeks to place integral human development at the heart of its mission. I say this because such confidence could easily be shaken by the many people, among them perhaps our peers and our colleagues, who believe that a Catholic university is an oxymoron, a contradiction in terms. And the naysayers fall into 2 categories. On the one hand, there are those who believe, and note, this is a belief statement on their part, it's not a position they can rationally argue, that faith and reason are completely incompatible. For them, the very notion of a Catholic university is, to quote Gerard Laughlin, a continual insult to human reason. On the other hand, there are Catholics, committed Catholics, who believe that the modern university has so lost its way that it is inhospitable to authentic religious faith and therefore should be abandoned. Dennis O'Brien, for instance, writes, "There is a fundamental clash between Catholic faith and the modern university." And Alistair McIntyre, whom we referred to earlier, he says that from a Catholic point of view, the contemporary secular university is not at fault because it's not Catholic. It's at fault because it's not a university. This is because the operative education model in many of our universities is no longer primarily at the service of human dignity and human flourishing, but rather at the service of the economy and of the marketplace. And I think in a comment very relevant to our earlier conversation about the current state of nursing and teaching and other professions, Gerard Loughlin says that, quote, "Today universities offer vocational courses, but little or no sense of vocation, of being called to a way of life, let alone a life for others and through others to God. Today universities seek merely to meet the tastes of their customers and the whims of their paymasters. Today, the university lies in ruins." Now, Pope Benedict XVI didn't mince his words either, and he spoke to young university professors, I think, in a remarkable address back at World Youth Day in 2011. And he commented that one has the idea that the mission of a university professor nowadays is exclusively that of forming competent and efficient professionals capable of satisfying the demand for labour at a given time. One also hears it said that the only thing that matters at the present moment is pure technical ability. Goes on to say, "We know that when mere utility and pure pragmatism become the principal criteria, much is lost, and the result can be tragic. From the abuses associated with a science which acknowledges no limits beyond itself, to the political totalitarianism which easily arises when one eliminates any higher reference than the mere calculus of power. The authentic idea of the university, on the other hand, is precisely what saves us from this reductionist and curtailed vision of humanity. In truth, the university has always been, and is always called to be, the house where one seeks the truth proper to the human person." I think Pope Benedict makes a very important point here when he refers to the truth proper to the human person. Faith and reason are not incompatible. They are two distinct but entirely compatible and necessary windows on the same reality, truth. They are, as we read in Fides et Ratio, they're like two wings on which the human spirit rises to the contemplation of truth. I think there'd be something fundamentally un-Catholic if we were to choose to abandon the higher education sector, no matter how secular the system becomes. And thankfully, clearly, that is not what is happening here. The opposite is the case. In fact, globally, Catholic higher education is thriving, if you just look at the statistics. As Catholic educators, our approach should always be, I think, we have much to learn from missionaries who seek out opportunities to live and proclaim the good news in whatever circumstances they find themselves. And I have to say that since coming to Notre Dame, and some of you know I was here 5 years ago just for a period of 2 months, I am really so impressed with how the Catholic identity and approach to education permeates this university, from the various schools and faculties to the various offices that provide student support and administration. It would be understandable if there was concern that none of what is precious in this regard should be lost as the university continues to expand, securing its financial viability, and of course meeting the criteria it must meet in regard to rankings and ratings, which are now an unavoidable dimension of higher education landscape. Frankly, we should be more concerned if there was an apparent easy accommodation between being Catholic and being a university than about the tensions, which can be healthy and which unavoidably arise nowadays when we try to and must render both to God and to Caesar. So the first point really is about keeping an eye on our Catholic, what's special about ourselves as a Catholic university. The second is I just want to push a bit further on nailing down ethos, mission and identity. Concepts such as ethos, mission and identity can be very difficult to be concrete about. They attempt to describe what I suggest is what we teach while we are teaching, what we communicate while we are communicating. As such, they're akin to what we call the hidden curriculum or the invisible pedagogy in the classroom. As the university becomes necessarily preoccupied with accountability for its performance in so many tangible aspects of its endeavours, student satisfaction, retention, employability options for students and so on. I think we also need to consider ways of encouraging, supporting, and indeed evaluating adherence and fidelity to our ethos, to our mission, and to our identity. We also need to ensure that our modus vivendi et operandi never comes into contradiction with the objects which we seek to serve. We need to preserve as much as possible the relationality I spoke of at the beginning of the paper that characterises the love of the triune God, and which I think should be mirrored not only in our own individual lives, but in every ecclesial institution, and that of course includes the university. And then thirdly, if I could say a key word about the centrality of chaplaincy. I think it's significant that when Newman set out to found his university in Dublin, in keeping with what he understood to be the medieval custom in the founding of universities, he prioritised the provision of a university church and a Blessed Sacrament chapel. And this was because he saw the university chapel as ennobling. He says, the university chapel ennobled by the religious symbols which were its furniture, which symbolised, he says, the indissoluble union between philosophy and religion. So somehow the presence, and very much I think the case here with the centrality of the Church of the Holy Spirit, that somehow that represents at the heart of where we have reason, of course, we discourse about reason, we also have religion. So Newman prioritised the establishment of an oratory akin to our own chaplaincies to invite what he called quality preachers and confessors on campus to establish various confraternities, all of which were aimed at counteracting what he called the dangerous instant to a higher school of learning and science. So the importance of this counterbalance. It was great today, for example, at Mass, that so many of the people working in senior positions were present at the Eucharist and present with other students and staff. So we should not underestimate the integral role that the top quality chaplaincy service plays in the life of a Catholic university. I think we can be very grateful for how much this university invests in that service. And I'm moving on to my conclusion. Pope Emeritus Benedict has said that being a Christian is not the result of an ethical choice or a lofty idea, but the encounter with an event, with a person, which gives life a new horizon and a decisive direction. And so as I conclude this paper, I want to talk about the importance really of us opening our students, opening ourselves, proposing this personal relationship with Jesus Christ. We wouldn't be speaking here tonight on integral human development if we did not accept that Jesus Christ not only reveals to us who God is, but who also unfolds for us. In fact, is the very definition of what it is to be a fully integrated human person. Everything we've been speaking of this evening would be for naught if a Catholic university did not at least invite its students and staff to consider the joy that comes from a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. A Catholic university must at the very least respectfully propose such a relationship, but of course it can never seek to impose it. Some of the most humbling and rewarding moments of my teaching ministry have been when I've been in a room, when certain breakthroughs, if I could call them that, spiritual growth spurts have happened in the lives of students. When students have finally, perhaps even after years of studying theology, shirked off an image or understanding, what was really a profound misunderstanding of God. In fact, one perhaps that was deeply unworthy of God, but equally deeply embedded. Then for the first time, in a very personal way, I've seen students come to realise not only that the existence of God, the God who is not to be conceived of as some distant deity out there, but as rather the ground and premise of their own very existence. And I can go back to the words of Brendan Kennelly, beautiful understanding of God. He says, God is the maker of the grass and the sea, the sweet creator of light, the image maker of the dark, the fountain of grace and truth, the first call of the cock in the morning, the last cry of my frightened mind. And I've also observed students coming to recognize that belief in such a God is not only plausible, but actually inviting and compelling. Why inviting? Why compelling? Because suddenly they realize that if such a God exists, then life is gift, it's not a burden. It's a journey in self-discovery rather than the lonelier, isolated, buffered, and burdensome, at times far too burdensome task of self-invention, for which they can only ultimately rely upon themselves. And then a light comes on. They see that God is reliable. And so faith is not so much about having to try to understand and accept difficult doctrines, but more fundamentally about trusting in God and relying upon God in one's day to day, with the very real and present person of Jesus accompanying them as the way, the truth, and the life. And so for the first time, there is a willingness, and I've seen this really happen in the last few years, particularly perhaps during the struggles of COVID. There's a willingness to abandon the illusion of autonomy, of having to try to be self-made men and women, and instead embracing with a relief and with considerable joy their interdependence as beloved creatures of God. Such moments of conversion, when they happen, and they do happen, are very precious. And the icing on the cake, so to speak, and in my experience, the antidote to much of the anguish of our age, is the realization that follows, and I think it's very much put in the words of Newman in his lovely prayer, that God has created me for some definite service. He has commissioned some work to me, which He has not commissioned to another. I have my mission. I may never know it in this life, but I shall be told it in the next. I am a link, a bond of connection between persons, integral to human development. And, I think this is the big crisis for many of our students. They do not know their meaning. They do not know their purpose. And as Nietzsche said, he who has a why can endure any how. An incomparable sense, and indeed access to an unfailing wellspring of well-being and of wellness comes from knowing that God has given us and created us for some definite purpose. I know I've covered a lot of distance in this paper. I began with consideration of Notre Dame's commitment to integral human development, and then the situation in the ecclesial tradition, and then looked at some of the realities. And you may have been struck by other realities, but some of the realities we face and that our students and graduates face. And finally, offered you some considerations that we need to take on into the future. Thank you so much for inviting me to give this lecture. I hope it has maybe given you some food for thought, and I look forward to, if you have time for a few questions and discussion. Thank you so much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fr Éamonn. I'd now like to introduce you to Professor Ryan, Head of School of Philosophy and Theology, and she's going to give a vote of thanks and also lead the Q&A session. So if you have some questions, now would be a very good time to answer or ask that.
Thank you, Professor Mansfield, and thank you very much, Professor Conway. Perhaps while we're thinking about a very rich paper, I could take advantage of the fact that I'm standing at the podium at the moment and ask Professor Conway if you could talk about some of the elements that might be universal to a Catholic pedagogy. I know that you've worked in Catholic education for a very long time. You've worked with teachers who have taught a variety of different subjects and subject matter, and I'm just wondering if there are some characteristics that you find, no matter what you're teaching as a Catholic educator, what might be some of the elements that you would be trying to convey to and with your students?
Thank you very much, Renee. I suppose I'm a theologian rather than an educator, but I think that's the interface we need to have and that conversation we need to have. First thing that comes to mind that really is, regardless of whatever pedagogies are out there, and I'm not formally trained as a teacher, I think you teach yourself, and that's where it comes back to integral human development. I mean, we can put a lot of, I'm not saying we shouldn't obviously make the best use of the research and the skills and the training we provide, but not in such a way that we undermine or don't seek to give the confidence to our individual teachers that you teach yourself. I mean, if any of us think back to when we were in school, you may not remember what a particular teacher taught you, but you remember that person. And I did a funeral for, I know we have some sisters, I think mostly presentation here, but I had a cousin who was a mercy sister, and I did her funeral. And she was a maths teacher, and all her life taught generations. And they were there, they were there at the funeral. You could see grandmothers who would be taught by her, and their grandchildren would be taught by her. And every single one of them said they got her through, as we call it in Ireland, the leaving cert. And maths is often experienced as a very difficult subject, at least in Ireland, and students can really stumble. And she got weak students through the leaving cert. And they were so grateful. But what she did and how she did that was she instilled, I think it's really about human dignity. She instilled a sense of their own dignity and their own worth. Even the way that she gave of herself and gave of her time outside of the ordinary working hours, that it became an interhuman experience. And I would say the witness she gave to her faith in that kind of a context was incalculable. So that's just the first thought that comes to my mind.
Thank you. I think there have been many rich conversations in this area as we do in our community at Notre now. I think there was a question in the second row. Am I right about that? No?
Now's your chance, folks.
Let's try.
Go away. Yeah, great. Professor Wood.
Magisterial lecture. Appreciate it very much. You've quoted at least 4 quotes, all of whom have as a common element of their diagnosis or condition, absence of human development, integral human development. When it comes to the remedy, it's a little trickier. It's the development knowledge. I guess my basic question for you is, in the context of Catholic education, does one have to come first, grace or intellectual growth? In other words, does the intellect open us to the possibility of grace? Or do you have to have grace to open the intellect to something that will be the remedy to the absence of human development for all those 4 quotes cited?
Thank you. Again, intuitively, I want to say it's not, we can't separate them. But I think, I know some very fine colleagues for whom their graced journey has been through the intellect, if I can put it that way. And particularly in contemporary culture, that they grasp the logic of faith. They grasp the reasonableness of faith. They see through the shallowness of a lot of what their culture is throwing at them, and the light comes on. But I still think that's grace at work. So it's grace at work, but the way in which grace travels into their hearts and minds is by way of an intellectual conversion. So I think we live in an age where that, I think we may have said this at our seminar last week, but I go to seminars now and I come out saying it's not faith that's at risk, it's reason. There's so much nonsense. I mean, you say hello, so when you see reason as it's argued in something like fides et ratio, if you're anyway open-minded and really not brainwashed, you will see the logic of faith represented. And that to have any other position is not reasonable. It defies reason. Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
We've got time for one more.
Yeah, back
Yes. Professor Harrison?
Yes, thank you. To be human is to be humane. So, and you mentioned Rabbi Sachs, and certainly, to remember that I was once a stranger in a foreign land, that's deeply part of the spirituality of the Old Testament. To love our neighbour, as we love ourselves. Now, the litmus test of loving our neighbour is how well we love the stranger. So, can we think a little bit of a litmus test for a good Catholic university of how well we love the stranger?
Yeah, I think that very much is the case, But I think, and all the buzzwords are in our vocabulary now of inclusion, of diversity, DIIE, is it? Diversity. Diversity, the Vice Chancellor has this also. Diversity, inclusion, equality, and EDA. We know what we're talking. But all I would say is that, I so often hear, in my own country, we're a Catholic university, but we're very inclusive. And I'm saddened by that.
Yeah.
We're inclusive because we're a Catholic university. We have deep motivation to welcome the stranger, which is not the way to push aside we're Catholic, but we push it aside so we can. No, it comes from our tradition. And I think we need to be a bit more systematic in unfolding the distinctive call to be inclusive, to welcome difference, to see the value in the other, that comes from within our own tradition, rather than simply trying to fit in with what I would say are coming from a truncated understanding of the human person very often. We need to, I think, do that. So obviously we need to reflect that extraordinary generosity that's in our tradition, and I think we need to unfold the distinctive sources we have for that. Thank you. Okay.
Well, I would like to very warmly thank Professor Conway for a very rich paper tonight, which I think we will be considering and drawing from in the years to come. You've set us a kind of program of work, I think, within my own school in supporting the strategic plan of the university, and I think that we would find that across the university itself. In our Catholic tradition of education, there's a great emphasis on joy in truth. And I found myself thinking about that as I was listening to you this evening, because I'm absolutely delighted that you are a professor now at our university. So I want to really welcome you to our national university. It's wonderful to see you in Fremantle. I'm really looking forward to seeing you in Sydney as well. So really, really joy-filled at this. The other thing that filled me with joy was the great connections that you were making through the paper. So we started with Irenaeus, who was from a very long time ago, and we have this concept of integral human development, which is relatively new in terminology, but I was struck by, St. John Henry Newman talks about how ideas develop, or doctrines develop rather, within our faith, and it seems that integral human development has been there from the very beginning, and arguably because that's within the reality of our existence, made in the image and likeness of the Unitarian God. So really given a great deal for us to think about, and as I say, it's delightful to see when a pattern like this is written across everything. So on behalf of everyone here tonight, I would really like to thank you very much and very warmly, and to welcome you again.
Thank you very much.